My hand wouldn't turn the key. I sat there in the driveway of my house on Clover Mill Road, engine not yet started, staring at the crack in my windshield that I'd been meaning to fix for 3 months. Arthur had told me about that crack last Thanksgiving. Said, "Dad, you're going to get a ticket." I'd laughed it off. Now Arthur was gone, and I still hadn't fixed it, and I couldn't bring myself to care about anything except getting to that lawyer's office by 10 o'clock. The reading of my son's will. 63 years old, and I never once thought I'd be driving to hear what my own child wanted done with his things after he died. That's not the order of things. Parents go first. That's the deal you make with the universe when you have children. Nobody told me the universe doesn't honor its agreements. I finally turned the key. The engine came to life. I put my hand on the gear shift. That's when I heard the knock on my passenger window. It was Hank, my neighbor from across the street, Hank Oberbeck, retired firefighter, 70 years old, man who still mows his lawn at 6 in the morning and waves at everyone who drives past. He was standing outside my car in his robe and slippers, hand raised, knuckles still resting on the glass. His face was wrong, too tight, like a man who had been deciding something all night and had finally made up his mind. I rolled the window down. "Don't start driving yet," he said. "I need you to come look at something." "Hank, I have to be downtown by 10. "I know. This won't take long." He paused. "It can't wait, Walter." Then he corrected himself, because he knew my name wasn't Walter. He'd called me that once before as a joke. Some old reference I'd long forgotten. "Sorry. Bernard. It can't wait." I turned the engine off. He walked me around to the back of my car, crouched down slowly the way men our age crouch, with deliberate care, one hand on the bumper. He pointed underneath. "I saw her out here last night," he said, "around 11. I couldn't sleep, so I was sitting in my front room with the lights off, just watching the street the way I do sometimes." He glanced up at me. "I know how that sounds." "I don't care how it sounds. Who did you see?" "Your daughter-in-law." Everything in me went still. "She had a flashlight," Hank said. "I thought maybe she locked herself out of her car and was looking for something she'd dropped. But she wasn't over by her car. She was over here, crouched down just like I am now, under yours." He looked back at the undercarriage. "I should have come over right then. I've been telling myself that all morning. I didn't because I thought I was imagining things. I thought, what reason would she have? You know?" I knew exactly what reason she had. I called a mechanic I've used for 20 years, a man named Pete who runs a one-bay shop off Route 9 and who has never once tried to sell me something I didn't need. I told him I needed him there now, not this afternoon, not later in the week. Now. He arrived in 40 minutes. He was under my car for less than 10. When he came back out, he didn't say anything right away. He wiped his hands on a red shop rag and looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression the doctor had used when he told me about Arthur's diagnosis. The one that means, "I don't want to be the person telling you this, but I am. So here we go." "Your rear brake line has been cut," Pete said. "Not all the way through, enough that it would hold for a few miles, then fail. Probably around highway speed." The lawyer's office was 11 miles away. "I'd take the highway." I stood in my own driveway on a Tuesday morning in October and understood that my daughter-in-law had tried to kill me. Her name was Cassandra. Cassie, she liked to be called. Arthur had met her at a conference in Denver 6 years ago. He was in commercial real estate. She was a financial consultant. Both of them sharp and ambitious and drawn to each other the way people are when they recognize something of themselves in another person. I had liked her at first. She was polished and quick, and she laughed at things I said, even when they weren't particularly funny, which I appreciated more than I should have. But something shifted after Arthur got sick. He was diagnosed with an aggressive form of liver cancer 14 months before he died. The doctors were honest with us from the beginning. The prognosis was not good, and treatment would buy time but probably not cure. Arthur handled it with more grace than I could have managed. He kept working as long as he could. He stayed present. He called me every Sunday the way he always had. We talked about baseball and politics and the books he was reading. We did not talk about dying because neither of us wanted to spend whatever time we had left on that particular subject. Cassandra handled it differently. Within 2 months of the diagnosis, she had hired an estate attorney. I told myself that was practical. Within 4 months, she had begun making inquiries, through mutual friends, I later found out, about the value of Arthur's commercial properties. I told myself that was also practical, that she was planning ahead, that grief does strange things to people. Within 6 months, she had started a quiet campaign to convince Arthur that his relationship with me had always been more complicated than he remembered. She did it carefully. Small comments, carefully placed. Your dad always seemed a little distant when you were growing up, didn't he? I wonder sometimes if he really understood you the way you needed. Nothing accusatory, just seeds. Arthur mentioned it to me once, about 8 months before he died. We were sitting on his back porch and he said, almost offhandedly, "Cassie thinks we've had some unresolved tension over the years." Have we? I looked at my son, this man I had coached through Little League and helped move into 3 different apartments and stood beside at his mother's funeral. And I said, "I don't think so. Do you?" He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "No, I really don't." That was the end of the conversation. But something had changed between him and Cassandra after that. I noticed it at Christmas that year. A tightness when she looked at him. The performance of concern without the warmth underneath it. Arthur changed his will 11 days before he died. I didn't know that until the morning of the reading. I didn't know he'd gone back to his attorney, a different attorney from the one Cassandra had hired, and revised the entire document. I didn't know he had left detailed instructions about his properties, his accounts, his personal effects. I didn't know what those instructions said. But Cassandra did. She had found out somehow. Arthur's primary attorney told me later that she had called the office twice in the week after Arthur's death, asking procedural questions, trying to determine what documents had been recently filed. The paralegal had been cautious, but Cassandra was persistent and clever, and she had put enough together to understand that the reading of that will was not going to go the way she had planned. So she had decided I shouldn't make it there. While Pete was on the phone with the police, I sat on my front steps and I thought about the last 14 months. I thought about all the moments that had seemed like grief, but were actually calculation. The way she had cried at Arthur's funeral, loudly, publicly, in a way that drew attention to her and made other people come to her. The way she had managed the guest list and the reception and the flower arrangements with a kind of controlled efficiency that I had attributed to her personality. The way she had called me the week after to make sure I knew about the arrangements for the reading and confirmed the time and the address twice. She had wanted to make sure I'd be in that car. The officer who responded, a young woman named Officer Chen, who looked about 30 and had the focused manner of someone who had heard a lot of stories and was very good at deciding which ones were true, listened to everything I said. She listened to everything I said. She listened to Hank. She looked at the brake line. She made a call. Cassandra was taken in for questioning that afternoon. I went to the lawyer's office. I took Pete's truck. The attorney's name was Douglas Hale, a quiet man in his late 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of careful stillness that good lawyers develop over decades. He had a box of tissues on his desk that I suspected got regular use. He asked if I was all right. I told him I'd explain later. He opened a folder. Arthur had left everything to me. The 2 commercial properties in the warehouse district that he'd been developing for the past 4 years, his investment accounts, which totaled just over $800,000, his personal effects, the 1968 Ford Mustang we had spent 3 summers restoring in my garage when he was in his 20s, and I had more time and fewer aches. At the bottom of the document, in a section, Arthur had apparently written himself and asked Douglas to include verbatim, there was a paragraph. Douglas read it aloud, and I will carry it for whatever years I have left. My father taught me that the most important thing a man can do is show up. He showed up for every game, every move, every hard conversation, every Sunday call. He showed up for my mother when she was sick and for me when I was sicker. I want him to know that I saw it. All of it. I always saw it. I don't remember exactly what happened in the next few minutes. I remember Douglas quietly getting up and leaving the room, which was a kind thing to do. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Forensics matched a flashlight found in Cassandra's car to trace particles from the underside of my vehicle. A search of her home turned up a printout of my car's make and model with handwritten notes about the brake system. She'd done her research, which somehow made it worse, the cold deliberateness of it. Her internet search history included queries about brake failure and accident reconstruction that dated back 3 weeks. But there was something else. Arthur's oncologist had been thorough. In the months before Arthur died, he had ordered several rounds of blood work to monitor his liver function and track the progression of the disease. One of those panels, run about 5 months before Arthur's death, had shown elevated arsenic levels. At the time, the oncologist had flagged it as potentially consistent with environmental exposure. Arthur had done some work in older buildings, and arsenic contamination wasn't unheard of, and had noted it for monitoring. Arthur had died of cancer. The arsenic finding had been set aside. When the police investigator looking into my case requested Arthur's full medical file as part of building the picture of Cassandra's behaviour, the oncologist reviewed the arsenic finding in this new context. He contacted the medical examiner. Given that Arthur had been cremated, his own wishes clearly stated there was no body to exhume. But the medical records were thorough, and the arsenic levels, in combination with the timeline of Arthur's accelerating decline, were enough to prompt a formal inquiry. A toxicologist reviewed everything. The conclusion was not definitive, it could not be without physical remains, but the opinion was clear, the pattern was clear. The pattern was consistent with chronic low-level arsenic exposure over a period of 3 to 4 months, consistent with poisoning. The prosecutor added a second charge. I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt when I learned this, because I have spent a lot of time sitting with it and I'm not sure simple words are equal to it. Grief is not the right word because I had already been grieving for 14 months. Rage is not quite right either, though there was rage. What I felt most was something like vertigo, the sensation of a floor you trusted suddenly not being there. Arthur had been sick. He had died of cancer. That was the story. That was the terrible, real, irrevocable story of what had happened to my son. Except it wasn't the whole story. Cassandra had not given him cancer, but the prosecutor's theory, supported by the toxicologist's assessment, was that she had accelerated his decline deliberately in the months before he died, months during which she had access to his food, his drinks, his supplements, to move the timeline forward before he could change his will again, or before he could tell me, or before he could do any number of things that a living man can do to protect himself. She was charged with first-degree attempted murder for the brake line. She was charged with second-degree murder for Arthur. The trial took 8 months. I attended every day. I sat in the second row behind the prosecution's table and I watched the process work. There were days when it was slow and technical and I had to focus very hard to follow the expert testimony. There were days when it was not slow at all. Cassandra's attorney was skilled. He challenged the arsenic evidence extensively, argued contamination, argued the limitations of the medical record, argued that correlation was not causation. He was not wrong that the evidence was circumstantial. He was, however, wrong that it was insufficient. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They convicted her on both counts. The judge sentenced her to 22 years on the attempted murder charge and a consecutive 18 years on the second-degree murder charge, 40 years total before eligibility for parole consideration. The judge noted, in his remarks before sentencing, that the premeditation demonstrated across both crimes, the research, the planning, the timeline, warranted the maximum end of the applicable range. I didn't feel triumph when the verdict came in. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect a certain reaction and I am not sure I had it. What I felt was something quieter, a settling, like a gyroscope finding its center after a long time of spinning. I drove home from the courthouse in my own car. The brake line had been repaired the day after everything happened. Pete had taken care of it that same week, and I pulled into my driveway on Clover Mill Road, and I sat there for a minute. Hank was on his porch across the street. He saw me and raised his hand. I raised mine back. I went inside and I called Arthur's number out of habit, the way I still sometimes do. It rang to voicemail. His voice said to leave a message and he'd get back to me. I just wanted to tell you, I said. I showed up. The properties Arthur left me are being managed by a firm he trusted. I'm not a real estate man, and I had no intention of becoming one at 63. The investment accounts I've largely left untouched. The Mustang sits in my garage, and sometimes on weekends I go out there and work on it for no reason in particular, just to be doing something with my hands in a space that still feels like him. Arthur's estate attorney, Douglas Hale, mentioned 6 months after the trial that there had been one detail in Arthur's instructions that he hadn't read aloud at the initial reading. He had thought it was too private for that moment, given the circumstances. He sent it to me in a letter. It was a list, 7 items, things Arthur said he wanted me to do after he was gone. Not with the money, not with the properties, just things. Go back to Yellowstone, we always meant to go back. Get the crack in the windshield fixed. Call Uncle Pete before it's too late, you know how he is about the phone. Watch the Ken Burns baseball documentary all the way through this time. Let yourself be sad without apologizing for it. Eat somewhere new once a month, somewhere you've never been. Don't be alone more than you want to be. I've done 5 of them. I'm working on the rest. Some mornings I still reach for the phone before I remember. Some Sundays still feel like missing a step on a staircase I've walked 1,000 times. That doesn't go away. I don't think it's supposed to. But I am here. My brakes are intact. My son knew exactly who I was. That turns out to be enough to keep going. There's something I keep coming back to even now. Cassandra was not a stupid woman. She was organized, calculating, patient in a way that most people never have the discipline to be, and none of it saved her. Every plan she made, every careful step she took, unraveled because of one retired firefighter who couldn't sleep and happened to be sitting in a dark room watching the street at 11 o'clock on a Monday night. That's how it ended for her. Not because of a brilliant investigation, not because someone set a trap, because Hank was an insomniac who still cared about his neighbors. I've thought a lot about what that means, about cause and effect, not in any mystical sense, just the plain mechanical truth of it. The choices we make don't disappear, they accumulate. Cassandra made dozens of choices over the course of 2 years, and each one left a mark somewhere, in a medical record, in a search history, in the memory of a man across the street who noticed something wasn't right. She thought she was being careful. She was actually just building a longer trail. Arthur made choices too. He changed his will 11 days before he died, in secret, with a lawyer Cassandra didn't know about. He wrote a paragraph about me that I will never be able to read without my throat tightening. He paid attention to what was real even when someone was working very hard to make him doubt it. That took something, a kind of inner steadiness, a refusal to let someone else rewrite his own story for him. I think about that more than anything else. My son was sick and in pain and being quietly manipulated, and he still found the clarity to know what was true. That kind of clear-eyed honesty with yourself, the willingness to trust your own perception even under pressure, I don't think that comes from nowhere. I think Arthur had been practicing it his whole life without either of us realizing that's what we were doing on those Sunday phone calls. And then there's what Hank did. He saw something, and he sat with the discomfort of not being sure, and then he made himself walk across the street anyway. He could have told himself it was none of his business. He could have convinced himself he'd imagined it. A lot of people would have. But Hank has a certain stubbornness about doing the right thing even when it's inconvenient. I've watched him shovel the sidewalk in front of houses that aren't his, in the cold without anyone asking. That's just who he is. And because of who he is, I'm still here. I think the hardest thing for me to absorb is that my son saw all of this coming before I did. He couldn't tell me directly. I don't know if he was afraid of what I'd do, or afraid of what it would confirm, or simply not ready to say the words out loud. But he did what he could with what he had. He acted on what he knew when he still had time to act. He showed up for me the only way left open to him. I'm 63 years old, and I've learned that the life you build, the reputation you earn, the relationships you tend, the small daily choices about who you're going to be, that's not just about legacy. It's structural. It holds things up. It protects people you love in ways you can't always predict and won't always see. Arthur knew who I was. That turned out to matter more than anything else.